live. I am reading out of Eyes of Horus. I interrupted the last chapter midway through, which was the fourth part of this book, and the chapter was entitled Royal Embalmer, and it was a little gruesome anyway. I will continue it. This is a book by Joan Marshall Grants. She was a far memory writer. She was able to remember her previous incarnations. And this one plays in Egypt, 3,500 years BC. And Heliokios is dead. He lives in the royal city. And Ra-Up, which is the life of Joan Grant, Ra-Up is traveling to ascertain who is true, who is just, and who is cruel. Anyway, we are here at the Royal Embalmer, and I finished, the embalmer's name is Jan, and he was describing the instruments. Even before I was as old as you are, I became interested in the complexities of the human body, and there were many questions to which I could find no answer. I knew the body was only the temporary habitat of the soul and spirit, yet I found also that, though a philosopher may continue his thoughts uninterrupted if the roof of his house is leaking, he cannot continue to ponder on abstractions when the body in which his soul is housed protests against considerable discomfort. There are some who maintain their soul to be so strong that pain can get no hearing, but though such men exist, and I have seen them deliberately inflict on themselves what to another would be unbearable torture, I have never heard a man who has used his vital energy to such a purpose make a statement which has added to the sum of the wisdom of mankind. He was scraping the brain out through the nose, thick whitish curds flecked with blood and mucus, and carefully transferring them to the first of the jars. I decided that as the soul could be incommoded by the flesh, it was the duty of a man to stop its flight from being so curtailed. The priests make a mystery of the soul, claiming that though all men have one, only the priesthood can understand it. Indeed, I was taught that to inspire of such matters was to incur the wrath of the gods. But I argued with myself, if a man breaks a water jar and has no one other see it to use, and has no other to use, he must learn to mend it or else suffer from thirst. Is it then unreasonable that if he breaks his body, he must mend it also? Yet, when I tried to learn, I found that what is under a man's skin is bright with blood and dark with mystery. And I said, is the arrow of an enemy the only thing able to see inside the body? Cannot that which comes to heal have as much vision as that which comes to destroy? Such questions were unanswered, if indeed I was not actually punished for asking them. How can I find out what has made a man ill, if I may not see what has made him well? How little we know the workings of this house in which we live. The lungs and the heart, the brain and the viscera, we know of them only because for many centuries they have been withdrawn by embalmers. He paused, and with a small knife made an incision under the left rib. Gently he widened it until he was able to put his hand into the cavity and drew out the heart. Blood oozed out of it and dripped slowly to the floor. He trimmed it off some of the large blood vessels that still adhered, and then put it into the second jar. His hands were slimy, so he sluiced them in a bowl of water before starting to use the slit in the flesh with swift, delicate stitches, using a copper needle and a strong waxed thread. While he did this, he went on talking. Finding that no one would allow a boy to satisfy his curiosity by opening a living body, and knowing that to touch a corpse except to prepare it for burial is to court death or banishment, I despaired until I realized how generous the gods had been in the choice of my parents. I was the son of an embalmer, So what could be most natural than that I should follow the embalmer's trade? Before he died, my father taught me all he knew, and while I worked with him, I had to do as he did. A hurried removal of viscera and steeping of the empty corpse in gums and rosins before bandaging. Inside those bandages, in 100 years, there will be only dust, and a few poor bones. Inside these, I now wind 1,000 years from now. He who unwraps them will be able to say, "This woman was beautiful," or "This man was proud." He was drawing out the viscera through a narrow slit on the right side of the belly, winding them slowly on a smooth stick, very slowly, for already they were beginning to rot and might break. The stench of decay and excrement conquered the clean pungent smell of our protective oils. My own belly seemed to twist, like a dog turning around and round to make a bed in the sand. I became famous, and for this I was grateful, for fame brought me many bodies from which to learn, and I found out many things which others are not yet ready to accept. I noticed that several women who were thought to have died because their unborn child had decayed within them had not in fact conceived, but had a growth in their womb. Sometimes it was bigger than my fist and hard as stone. What would have happened if this growth had been removed before they were dead? Would they have regained their health? How could I know? There were many healers with a knife, but they only attended one who had been injured by a weapon or broken a bone so that it protruded from the skin. No one would come to an embalmer until they were dead. So I took to myself a twin brother, though he is not known to any of my household save 2 trusted servants. If anyone has noticed the resemblance between the healer with a knife, who has a little house in the poorest quarter of the city, and Jan, the royal embalmer, none have remarked on it, and I am free to live my 2 lives without disturbance. It was on a day when I was playing this second role that I first heard of the Watchers. Hanuk was lodging at the house of a woman whose breast I had opened to drain an abscess. It had healed rapidly, and she was grateful and talked of me to all she met. Through her, Hanuk came several times to my house, and when he had taken my measure, he told me of the Watchers and said I was one of them. Because we were friends, amongst whom such things are permissible, I played a joke on him, saying I could get the royal embalmer to join us. And though Hanuk was doubtful, he at last agreed to come to this house, and found that instead of 2 new Watchers, he had only 1. Through a third indecision in the back, he was taking out the lungs, and the 4th jar was ready to be sealed. A heavy brazier was brought in by a man whom I recognized as one of the litter bearers, though now he was dressed as we were. Over it was placed a pot of what looked like dark wax, and when this began to bubble, it gave off a cloud of steam, the smell suggesting that it was not only bitumen but spikenard and myrrh, perhaps septis oil and other things as well. By means of a hollow reed fitted with a plunger, the boiling liquid was forced into the brain cavity through the nostrils that was still held open by the metal strip, and in the same way it was injected into the throat and ears. Then another hollow reed, narrower than the first one, was inserted into a slit in the scrotum, and afterwards the ancient wrinkled penis was distended with wax until it looked as though it had regained the eagerness of its forgotten youth. Jan paused and glanced at me. This is the point beyond which I usually work alone, but I hope you will stay, if you find my work of interest. There's not much more to do, only the withdrawing of the larger veins, but it is slow when the body is old, and many hours have passed since the blood congealed. He opened each arm inside the elbow, and with forceps began to draw out the pallid knotted cords which once had beat with life. Blood clots slid down on the table with little soft flops. He treated other parts of the body in the same way, the insteps under the knees and each side of the neck. Each place he closed the small incision with such care that it showed only a thin line. Then another pot was put on the brazier. As far as I could judge, it contained beeswax, to which was been added certain aromatic gums. When this had sufficiently melted, but before it came near to boiling, Jan lightly coated the whole surface of the body with it, using a brush, such as a scribe takes for a large wall painting, and allowing one side to dry before turning it over to the other. At a sign from his master, the man who had been tending the brazier came forward and lifted the feet of the corpse. Jan took it by the head, and together they carried it through the opening in the far wall which I had noticed when I first entered the room. As I stooped to follow them, for the entrance was very low, I heard water dripping. The corpse was lying in a narrow depression in the floor, shaped rather like a bath in Mary's apartments, and above it an enormous water jar was suspended from the roof by strong ropes. At the bottom of this jar a flexible tube led from a spigot, and the end of the tube was joined to a piece of hollow reed about 6 palm breadths in length. "This is not pleasant to watch, even when one is used to it," said Jan. I was too proud to admit that I had already seen enough of embalming to last me a lifetime, so I told him I would rather stay to see all he was willing to show me. The head of the corpse was forced back and the jaws levered open until the mouth and throat were in straight line with the trunk. The strong yellow teeth seemed to be trying to crunch on the reed as it was driven down between them. At first they seemed to resist the pressure, and then it slid on easily. With a sharp twinge of nausea, I realized that why it went on easily, because there was no longer anything in the empty trunk to offer resistance. This is enough to ensure drainage. If it were not there, the brine might force its way between the stitches, even past the protective covering of wax. Or else it would distend the body so that your kinsman would journey through the underworld with a paunch. A good embalmer is as jealous of the appearance of those he prepares as is the old woman who bedecks a foreign concubine for the balconing. The great jar was filled with hot brine, which contained various mineral salts used by certain tribes for pickling meat. As the spigot was turned, the fluid gurgled down into the corpse. It writhed as though it were struggling for breath, with the chest and belly heaving like a drowning man who fought for life, a man we were trying to drown. I found myself to watch this passionately. I mustn't let Jan see how much I want to be sick. The second tube through which the fluid drained away led into a grating at the bottom of the bath. Only when Jan had finally satisfied himself that a constant flow was passing through the body without touching any of the outer skin did he say there was no need for us to stay there any longer. "There's nothing more for me to do. The jar will be kept filled for the next 7 days, and only then will the body be ready for the last stages, when a preparation of bitumen and certain reagents will be applied for the time that must still intervene before it is ready for the bandaging." I was very glad to follow him up the shafts and to breathe the clean air. I knew I had been underground for a long time, but I was surprised to find it was after sunset. "I hope you will do me the honor of sleeping at my house," he said. "It would be a great joy to talk with one of the eyes of Horus, and it may not be easy to another time for us to have the opportunity." When I had washed, this time the lemon-scented water was heated, and the servants scoured me with sand to remove all traces of the pungent oils. I joined Jan under a vine trellis in the garden where food and wine had been set for us. I find I was very hungry, and for a time ate in silence. Nor did he speak except to ask my preference for a dish, or whether I would rather drink a different wine. He gave me the toast of the watchers and said, "I will vouch that the son of the oryx has wise eyes and a strong stomach, and that it is a godly combination for any good man. There are not many who could have watched what you watched today and still done justice to Emir afterwards. Even when the corpse surged with the water, you did not flinch. Only 2 other men, apart from those whose work it is to assist me, have seen that, and one of them vomited and had to be carried out, and the other thought the corpse had come alive and screamed out a confession, in which he told me that he had hastened the death of his uncle by putting into his food putrid meat taken from under the claws of a dead lion. I knew he was guilty, but wanted him to admit it. That is why I let him see me at work." I laughed. "Do you suspect me of my kinsman's death? And if so, do you judge me innocent? or too hard with crime for guilt to prick me? Neither, but I live in a city of hypocrisy, and it is good to see one who is by his action proves that in the Oryx there are still free men. He was your kinsman and left you heir to his possessions. In return you are seeing that the customs by which he lived are carried out as he would have wished, but you do not lament his death as others would have pretended to do. Why should I lament? Had he been my friend of many lives, I would have tried to find the courage to rejoice in his freedom rather than to cloud it with my own grief. As he is not joined to me by affection, but only by relationship, though he has shown me kindness for which I am very grateful, why should I lament that he goes one way and I another, any more than if we were two acquaintances who pass each other on the road? The people of this city have so long worshipped false gods and followed the rituals of an ignorant priesthood that they have lost the standard of reality. The false has become their truth, and truth they would treat as a barbarian if they ever met her. That is why I knew you were from the Oryx before I saw the Oryx clasp you wear. With you, a man is friend or enemy, and you hope to teach the enemy to be a friend. You do not suspect others of treachery, because she is a harlot you have never known. Patronage or the smile of a sycophant are both strangers to your mouth, for you judge men by their heart. You know that all men are what you wear or what you will become, and knowing this, know also that in them is something which is part of you calls brother, which a part of you calls brother. I have seen many dead men, and I learnt of them through those who came here as their last companion. Grief and pain, both are enemies of hypocrisy. So in 20 years as embalmer and healer with a knife, I have learned much of this. Of the city and of these people. I can give you the names of 50 whom I know belong to our company, though as yet they have not heard of the Watchers. And I know of 500 whom the dawn will blind. He stood up and put his hand on my shoulder. Now it is time for us to sleep. You are weary, and I too am tired, for 5 of my temporary tombs are filled with nobles and officials, whose flesh would prove to any man that death admits no difference of caste. This is the end of part 4 and the last chapter of part 4.